Well, that would make sense. That would make sense indeed. As you said, this is a war they can end at any time. At any time, tomorrow. They can just literally do it tomorrow. Um, other bond news I saw today was that Ukrainian creditors in dollars, I believe, are giving Ukraine a payment holiday. Could you give us a bit more color on that, Finance?
Unfortunately, so the good and bad news on this. The bad news on this, I don't know how to bill this as anything but a default, though everybody's being nice in the papers. I'm not saying it. It's a default. That said, it's the best default possible because Ukraine needs its money to fund its government. Its government's doing things like paying for food, medicine, and the guys who are repairing roads, bridges, the guys who are improving their rail network to get grain out, the guys who are the men and women. I'm not, when I say guys, please don't take this to be sexist here. The men and women in Ukraine who are fighting in the army. There's a lot of things they need to pay for, military and non-military, that they need some cash for. So not having to pay your debtors for 2 years when hopefully this war will be over and won by then. Because even Major Giroux, who thinks we should strap in for a long conflict, 2 years is even long by his estimations. Excuse me. So I would say that in the case of a 2-year debt holiday, when they need to be paying for things way more important than being in default, yeah, it's a solid move by Ukraine. There aren't great options here because, well, when you're defending against genocide and half your economy shut down because of the war, there aren't great financial options. So this is, sort of the best kind of default you can imagine. You don't want to be in default, but if you've got to be in default and you're Ukraine, this is sort of the way you want to do it.
Cool. Just for information, we've actually gained 3 listeners since we started Bond Chat. So whatever it is we're doing, it's working. I have another question.
What works really well is referring to all bankers as prostitutes in suits. That gets the listeners.
As a former banker, I could not agree more. So can you buy CDS protection on Ukrainian government debt? Is there a market for that?
There is a market for almost anything, and since Ukraine is not sanctioned, I believe there is, but I have no idea what it is.
Because I'm wondering
the question would be whether it's worthwhile buying.
Because I'm kind of wondering what the spread's doing here, and who is how is the CDS market, how is the OTC CDS market treating this payment holiday? Have they just all agreed to be nice about it, or are some people calling it in? Are some people being dicks and not others? Do they get to call in the CDS?
It seems like they've gotten the whole tranche. So if you've negotiated with enough of your creditors to get that, that's why I think it's clearly a default. I would assume by CDS it is. I would actually have to check that. That's a really good comment. I should go look that up.
It is an interesting one, right? Because, I mean, I'm guessing the way this would work, right, is it's a bit like a corporate action. If you negotiate with a stiff enough majority of your creditors that there will be a coupon holiday, then the rest of them have to go along with it, right? So there's kind of a drag along type thing. Is that how it generally works?
Yeah, you usually have to look underneath the covenants. So generally sort of gets tossed out the window. And especially when you start talking about, foreign government bonds, the governance can be slightly different. You care a lot about like what court things are in. Governments tend to not give up on sovereignty over their bonds, etc. So a lot of things come into play.
I'm guessing because
isn't there a core? Isn't there? Sorry, Tim. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't there normally for sovereign bonds? Isn't there a quorum of say 80% or something you need to harness?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was getting at. I don't actually know off the top of my head, but I would assume it's a bit like a corporate action in that regard. Because my next comment was going to be, this is what 20 yards of exposure, $20 billion. If the CDS starts getting called in on that, then it's going to have it potentially has a systemic effect, right? Because not many banks are going to be writing this. Probably not many. Who's
Yeah,
going to write CDS protection
I
on
wouldn't
Ukraine?
expect this to be systemic. This isn't exactly like, you know, mortgage CDS in the early aughts, right? This is Ukrainian government CDS is a pretty. You're looking at a pretty arcane instrument at this point.
But an instrument that probably only, 2 or 3 banks deal in. The OTC.
Do we know who the counterparties are? Is it Barclays and who else?
Deutsche, perhaps? I don't know.
Deutsche doesn't have any Ukrainian risk on its books.
Unicredit, possibly. RBI, they're reasonably big in Ukraine. But don't know. I'm kind of guessing. Banks that point east.
Yeah, if you give me a day, I'm
but it's a
going to
good
call
point.
someone
Can somebody
Bloomberg
pull this
Terminal.
up? Yeah, can you, Finance, can you pull this up when you are back?
Does anyone have a Bloomberg? Do any of you guys run a Bloomberg terminal? That'd be the easiest way to do it, and I don't have
In
one.
the Finance, in the office.
Здесь очень хорошо. Люди очень такие внимательные, очень внимательные, обходительные,
So if
работящие.
any one of our listeners has a Bloomberg terminal and access to it, could you please have a little look-see as to who are the counterparts, please?
We've gained 13 listeners since we started talking about bonds, by the way, just saying.
We should continue doing this. But then again, when bonds and debts are being served or not served and discussed, typically what happens? Blood in the streets.
Well, I think there's probably quite enough of that already, no?
Which brings me back to another thing, what we've thought about when providing additional help to Ukraine. We should actually, because I find it absolutely terrifying. It's nice to have that the European cities and some American cities are creating additional city partnerships, and that's grand. I like it. That's fine. It's good for cultural exchange and everything and support and whatnot. But just because you get another few fire trucks here and there and whatnot, that doesn't help. What you need to have is municipal bonds. Individual cities, just as Decoding Trolls had highlighted, the individual villages and rayons and the likes have to be able to finance themselves. Yes, there needs to be a collateral guarantee, but certain municipal bonds in future could definitely, absolutely resuscitate the economy. If you can create a Mariupol bond and a Kherson bond, I'm quite sure you'll find takers.
Well, I guess it depends how their legal system works, right? Because certainly up here in Estonia, if an entity that is essentially, if a sub-sovereign government entity issues debt, it is by default guaranteed by the Estonian state. So if you're a state-owned hospital and you borrow money, then that is Estonian government debt. So I don't know how Ukraine works in that regard, but certainly up here in Estonia, you can't bifurcate the two. If you're a government entity, it's government debt.
Well, typically the concept in most Central European countries was GRE, government-related entities, but they do trade typically at a discount to pure government bonds. The reason why I'm saying this is actually that you can therefore create an additional amount of attraction for a certain region. But Finance, please go.
My worry right now is I am very wary, given the significant uncertainty around the hryvnia, which is a rational uncertainty given the war, to have non-hryvnia debt for any Ukrainian government entity, because that could be a problematic source of instability.
Fully agreed.
Right. So, and then issuing loans in hryvnia to foreigners both would reduce the appetite, and there's all sorts of capital control issues currently in play. So while I appreciate the thought, Axel, I'm currently not quite as high on it because I would only want to be issuing debt in hryvnia if I could, if I'm a Ukrainian government entity of any level, whether it's local or the government thereof. And I don't know about, and the number of issues that comes from getting foreign money, that's a little rough.
Well, maybe that's a reconstruction issue at some point in time, as soon as Ukraine wins the war. During reconstruction, you would like to find ways to segregate certain regions out and market them in a different way. And that's why I tend to believe that municipal bonds for certain projects might actually play a role, but you would obviously have to add some kind of facility for foreign investors to swap out the currency risk. Alrighty, Tim.
Well, speaking from my own experience doing business in Ukraine, what Ukrainian companies typically do is they just pass the FX risk further down the totem pole. So say you've got an agricultural trading company who's exporting grain priced in dollars. He will agree a dollar amount. He will agree with his suppliers, so the farmers and the agribusinesses, a dollar amount for his crop, and whatever it is, whatever that dollar amount is in hryvnia, when he gets paid, is the amount he gets. So he could get more hryvnia, he could get less hryvnia, but the actual contract is agreed in dollar terms, which kind of sucks if you're a farmer, or doesn't suck if you're a farmer, depending on where the market is. But the multinationals find that the only efficient way around the FX risk the exporters find that the only efficient way around the FX risk in the absence of in the absence of an actual forward market for hryvnia, which there isn't, is simply to kick it down, kick the risk downstairs to whoever is supplying you. That's what they tend to do.
And as I'm sure you heard a moment ago, I was picking up my children, so I have a little call from my small assistants here.
Slava Ukraini! Love Slava!
Fantastic. Hello, Miniature Finances.
We're working on Heroin Slava. It's next up.
Excellent. But yes, I mean, Axel, the solution here is that there needs to be created somehow a proper liquid market in hryvnia forwards. I mean, that's what needs to happen, which is, given the relative size of Ukrainian banks, is a really, really big ask. A seven-figure trade is a big trade for Ukrainian banks. That's a lot of risk for them. They are really, really small, and it's not the kind of thing you can pull directly out of your ass, put it that way. So there's going to need to be a lot of institution building and a lot of capital building in order to create a realistic FX market in hryvnia, because at the moment one doesn't exist. Another potential solution would be, it's a lot easier if you're in the commodities business, because of course all of these commodities are dollar priced. So you can use the commodity futures market to hedge your FX to an extent, because there's also a local market for these commodities in hryvnia. But that is very expensive and a very roundabout way of doing things. Last time I did something like this, the cost of a hryvnia hedge was between 5 and 8%. So really, really super expensive.
How expensive?
5 to 8%.
Well, compared to the need?
I mean, I've never thought that Citibank had a use until I'm like, how are they not here? This is sort of their bailiwick, right? Like it. To give an idea, Tim, I understand why that's high. Can you explain what a normal currency forward would look like for a couple $1 million worth of any other currency, say a British pound or, even a Hungarian currency?
It would typically be the basis between the bank rates of the respective central banks plus a small spread for the dealer, right? So I don't know, euro rate is 50 basis points and your sterling rate is 125 basis points. You're going to be paying 75 basis points for the hedge, plus plus whatever very, very competitive spread the bank puts on it.
So all in, you're talking 2.25% to hedge in the future.
Would likely be tighter than that, but honestly, I've not done this for a long time in major liquid currency, so I don't really know. But it would be tighter than that. You're talking about forward points. Yeah.
So and you haven't done it for a long time, and things get way tighter in these spaces over time, significantly. So for everybody's understanding, to do this, to change your hryvnia in the future, is 5 to 8%. To do it in major European currencies or the Japanese yen is well under 2%, just for an idea of what the differences in pricing would be. That is a huge friction for people trying to do business in Ukraine internationally.
Absolutely, and it's partly a function of the respective bank rates, right? Because when you hold a particular currency, you have you have an opportunity cost of what to do with it, right? So you can swap it into another currency, but if that other currency has a higher deposit yield, has a higher money market yield, you will be paid by whoever you are going to have to pay whoever is taking the other side of the swap, right? So if I have euros at 0 and dollars at 1%, and I swap my euros into dollars, whoever's giving me the dollars is not making any yield on those dollars in the money market. So he is going to have to. So I'm going to have to pay him to compensate for his loss of yield, if that makes sense. Did I explain that well?
I understood it. I'm not sure that people who aren't used to dealing in foreign currencies are going to totally understand it. But it's the kind of point that's quite abstract and in it, and then it's super simple.
Yeah. So it's there's basically an opportunity cost built in, right? So if I have a whole bunch of euros and the euros at like 1%, and the hryvnia rate, the central bank rate in Ukraine is like 15%, and I want to swap my euros into Ukrainian hryvnia, right? All of a sudden, a guy who is lending me the Ukrainian hryvnia effectively is going to want to be compensated for his loss of yield. So that's where most of the cost comes from. It's compensating the other party who is giving you their currency that they could be picking up a lovely yield from in the banks. Then there is a spread on top of that, which, depending on how awkward it is to deal in any particular currency, can be quite large as well. So yeah, that's basically how it works.
And while this is all quite probably dry and boring to the non-financial audience, it's incredibly important for if you're trying to have a little stability to know how much money you're going to get on your grain harvest next year, or your gasoline harvest you don't harvest gasoline, or your gasoline production next year, if you want to take out the risk of what some of the future price fluctuations. This is how you make these businesses a little more stable.
Yep, and the swings in the actual exchange value of the currency become important, because Ukrainian hryvnia is a currency that can move 10% against major currencies, right? And that could be, depending on what business you're in, that could be your whole margin, right? That could be the difference between you being a profitable farmer and you having to sell your cows and your wife and your children. So this is a big issue. This is a big thing, and there is currently not a cheap way around it, and that is something we're going to have to build. in cooperation with Ukrainian financial institutions and Western financial institutions, the ones with balls at least. And even then, it doesn't solve the fundamental problem of exchange controls in the Ukrainian hryvnia, which is another issue entirely.
I see M is currently hosting. M, are you with us right now, sir?
I was just about to welcome him.
I am. Good evening, everyone. Was just listening to the financial conversation.
M, would you mind shifting a little bit to the airline question I asked you earlier today, or do you want to discuss that at a later time?
Well, I still haven't gathered enough information about that, but it looks quite interesting. If you'd like to expand on it and share your opinion, maybe I can chime in.
So, originally pointed out to me by actually one of our regular listeners that Wizz Air is a Dubai-based airlines that is a discount airlines that operates a Hungarian subsidiary and is recently reopening due to, according to them, significant demand for their Russian route, their route to Moscow. It's not illegal for them to fly from Europe to Moscow, it's just morally questionable. But when you hear about a airline in Dubai that flies to Moscow and other routes like that at a discount rate, you got to wonder. As part of they were also offering Ukrainians 100,000 free tickets. Except they aren't really going to Ukraine. So who were they giving these tickets to? Since we also know about significant human trafficking into Dubai specifically of Ukrainian women, often captured, basically enslaved into human trafficking from the war. We are wondering if this is an airline that is participating significantly so that all of those, and I quote, free tickets are not in fact some sort of nice thing given to Ukrainians, but what they just literally advertised in public was human trafficking. We're not sure. We're looking into it, but it looks suspicious as hell right now, given where this airline is located and where they travel to and from.
International air travel is heavily regulated, and there is information sharing protocols between companies operating airliners and between countries operating airports as well. So this requires a proper legal investigation, and as it stands right now, we have an interesting story. We just hope that someone more interesting than us is listening and may, pick the lead and dig into it. But given my current insights and access and capabilities, I have no further comment. But Axel, please go ahead.
It's a simple request which you can finance with IATA, and IATA will have to give you an answer as to whether Wizz Air complies with all the KYC and AML requirements for ticket holders, and whether everyone who has purchased a ticket has had a valid international credit card. And then you know.
Unless they're accepting Bitcoin.
Yeah, they can't, and you know that.
Oh, we never know anything about what's happening in UAE anyway. I mean, since the beginning of the invasion, the amount of money that went into the NFT market there is just bloody ridiculous.
Because it has nothing to do with the aim of NFT. It just is a matter of making sure that you can transfer money.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a storage of value and a vehicle for exchanging as well. So the whole thing is bizarre. But yes, Axel has just pointed out that someone needs to contact the company and ask whether they are following the known guidelines for issuing tickets.
If only NAFO would know what to do with Wizz Air.
I think they have an idea or two.
And I can see a few fellas there, so let's see.
Calling on NAFO. Calling on NAFO. Do your thing. Ladies and gentlemen, it's 10:35 in Cairo. Good evening. This is the Maria Report. We have a couple of empty speaker slots, so if you'd like to come up and ask a question or bring up a topic for discussion, feel free to do so. And we would be glad to answer your questions and discuss your topics to the extent of our knowledge. So we have Ben, we have Ryan, we have JJ, first time I see JJ. And we have Tim, and we have Axel, and we have myself, one sleepy Egyptian, on a Thursday night. So feel free to blast away.
With the most fantastic background noise you could ever have.
Yeah, if you live in Cairo long enough, we actually learn to sleep around noise. It's fascinating. I can sleep deeply around noise, and all it takes is someone to say "M" or just like push my shoulder to wake me up. Very strange.
Well, on that bombshell, it is 11:36 here in Tallinn, so it's past my bedtime. So I will be bidding you all good night, and I will see you first thing tomorrow morning with the rest of the European team, where we will be talking about more Ukrainian stuff. And I promise we will try not to dwell too long on sovereign defaults and CDS spreads tomorrow. Thank you very much, and good night, everybody.
Sheep farming, mate. Sheep farming.
We can talk about that as well, Axel.
All right, thank you, Tim. Good night. Just Cindy, please go ahead. You requested the mic.
Hi, today I'm running errands, and I am out of Twitter. But I am asking about what is happening now near Crimea after all the airport bombardments or auto explosions or HIMARS. What is happening there? And if there are more bridges that have been blown between yesterday and today. Here I am at 4:25 p.m. My location. Thanks.
I'm sorry, Cindy. 90% of what you have just said came through very unclear. Can you please avoid any background noise and maybe use the mic on your phone instead of a headset or earphones and relay your message?
Okay, now you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. I can hear you better now.
Okay, I was in well, I am running errands, and today I am not so in. And I am asking what's happening near Crimea with all the Russians. If any other bridge has been blown up. Thanks.
You want someone to blow off the bridge? Is that what you want? Cindy, are you discussing the bridge connecting Crimea?
Yes. Yes. The Crimean Bridge or the another one near the Isium or any other bridge that has been blown up, if yes or not. Because I am running errands and I can't be here talking right now. Thanks. But listening, yes.
All right, good luck with running your errands. As soon as we find out about any blown up bridges, we'll let you know. John Stewart, please go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear, sir.
I just was doing some reading the other day, and I wanted to ask Axel, whilst he's still on the stream, or maybe somebody else might know. But I wasn't aware of the and never thought of it as suspicious, but a few people had sort of mentioned it, and just in terms of just what we now know of, this was 2008, I think, what we now know of Putin and what he's capable of. I just wondered if anybody in Europe on the call who knew about that had any thoughts on whether or not it was suspicious. I think most of the Polish government died in the plane crash, and it always to me seems just too incredibly unlucky to be anything other than an accident. I have seen quite a few people suggesting that it was a sabotage, Russian sabotage. I think it was back in 2008. I just wondered if sort of
Well, that accident has been shrouded in mystery from day one. And one theory is that forward air traffic operators were used to relay wrong altitude data to the plane as it approached descent. There was an investigation, and that investigation was delegated to the Russian authorities instead of involving the Polish authorities. There is an ongoing, there are ongoing hearings about the whole matter still in Poland today. I think we have someone here who can speak to that. I don't know if Joe King Scholar can speak to this. She's the most knowledgeable person I know about the history of this accident. We don't have Axel with us, so I'll send you a speaker invite. If you can join us, please do. We would love to hear from you.
Thanks. I just thought it would be really interesting if it was one of those things that it's capable of. I mean, we've always known that in terms of the poisonings and the cover-up of the plane crash.
Professor John Schindler, former Naval War College, former NSA, wrote about that accident on his personal blog a couple of times. So if you search for John Schindler and the name of the accident, you might come across a couple of the articles he posted on this matter. They're very informative.
Brilliant. I will do. Thanks. It just what rang my bell on it was Putin was prime minister at the time, and I think he was the person who was responsible ultimately for publishing the investigation into it. And I just thought, my goodness, if that was his call in terms of what was published, then anything could have happened, couldn't it? Really?
Yeah, absolutely. But to date, there is no concrete evidence, sadly, though. So, but yeah, I totally understand, John.
Okay, thanks for hosting the stream, Em. It's always good to hear you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, John. My pleasure. We seem to have lost Nina. She requested earlier and then she dropped. So Nina, if you're still in the audience, please send us a speaker request. Oh, Joe King is here. So Joe King, please go ahead. And John Stewart, stay with us. You might hear some interesting commentary about that accident.
Well, first of all, this plane crash is a very complicated matter. It's right now it has been used for over 10 years as a political tool for the opposition. Everything that could go wrong with this flight went wrong because first of all, this sorry, I'm a bit tired, but the government was almost like the entire government was on the plane. People connected with the peace, but it stands for something else, party. So the party that is right now in power. Who have been very, very critical of Putin. So Kaczynski, who was the president back then, he is the guy who only a couple months before the plane crash went to Georgia when Russia invaded Georgia. And he had this quite famous speech warning all of Europe that if we don't react to the Russian atrocities, Ukraine will be next, then the Baltic states, and then perhaps even Poland. That's more or less the exact quote he said. Only a couple of months later, the government, together with the president, they boarded the plane to fly to the memorial place of Smolensk, where thousands and thousands of Poles were brutally murdered during the Second World War. This was covered up also by the Russians, only to be discovered by Germans. Back then, a lot of intelligentsia died, and the government and politicians were flying to, like every year, to pay homage to those who died. The plane was, if I recall correctly, the plane was swapped at the last instance, and because it was a Russian plane, it was serviced by Russians. So sometime earlier it was in Russia, and it was serviced by Russians. The Prime Minister, who is right now the Donald Tusk, so he's right now the main leader of opposition. He was also supposed to fly on the plane, but in the end he didn't fly. He stayed behind and he boarded another plane. This same guy, Donald Tusk, is someone who has been very cozy with Putin. He has been meeting Putin on a piers in Gdańsk without anybody listening in. He was also forcing Poland to be fully dependent on Russian gas. And although what he's selling in the EU, that he's very anti-Russian, when you look at what when you look at his actions, you will see that he has very strange relations with Putin and the Kremlin. So Donald Tusk stayed behind, and the party with Kaczynski boarded the plane. When they were coming down, the weather was quite bad, and one of the theory is, as M stated, that the information relayed from the tower was wrong. So the height, the altitude was actually different from what it was, and the plane went down. Another theory is that there was a bomb on the plane, as like I said earlier, it was serviced in Russia a couple of weeks earlier, and also some explosives were found in the flight remains. However, this also doesn't prove. It's hard to say whether this was the case, because it might have been that where it was serviced, it just touched a bit of some explosive, so it doesn't prove that the bomb was on the plane. When the plane went down, there was a very strange reaction from the opposition, so Donald Tusk again, within Poland, because just an hour after the plane went down, the Donald Tusk and we have this TV station highly connected with opposition. All of them already declared the reason for the crash. So that was very surprising, because usually you wait a bit before you say definitely why that happened. And what the rhetoric that they started selling was that it was an error on behalf of the pilot, and in fact it was Kaczynski, the president, who caused the plane to went down to go down, because someone heard that Kaczynski entered the cockpit and was forcing the pilot to go down, to land the plane in spite of the bad weather. So this is what the TV station connected with opposition party started saying. This is what the opposition started saying only an hour after the incident. And this is what they continue to say. Because this was not a commercial flight, the law says that, because if it's a commercial flight, then investigation is done by the country where the crash takes place. So if this was a commercial flight, then indeed Russia would have been the country conducting the investigation. However, this by no means was a commercial flight. This was a government flight. And in this case, the law says that the investigation can be done, or even must be done, I'm not sure, but definitely there's an option of the investigation being carried out by the country where the plane originated from. So in this case, it would have been Poland. Meanwhile, because so many people died, it was, if I'm not mistaken, about 70 people who perished in this plane. So this is a huge chunk of the government. The opposition parties started slowly creeping up, and I mean, obviously, someone had to step up, and so the new prime minister, the new president, and people in power started talking with Russia, and they decided that actually it's better if Russia carries out the investigation, and they only sent a couple of people, a couple of Polish people will go and perhaps help them out a bit. So Russia started doing the investigation. They, of course, they published a report where they said that it was all the fault of the pilot, so on and so forth. It was the plane touched a tree, and that's how it went down. At the same time, some of the people who remained from the party that mainly died in the plane crash started carrying out their own investigation, but this was very difficult because even after Russia finished the investigation, they did not never return the remains of the plane. Poland has been asking for the remains of the plane to be returned for many years now, but they deny it, and thus it's very difficult to declare something definitely. And then the story gets even more complicated with Donald Tusk having multiple meetings with Putin, and we got the gas story involved as well. And also whenever people are trying to bring up the story of the plane going down and perhaps Russia being responsible for it, opposition starts saying that people are panicking and starting some conspiracy stories. And it's before the war, they even would start saying that it's very bad for relations with Russia, and to the point that even though the president died, even though the first lady died, and 70 other very, very important people, there's still no monument in Warsaw to pay. The monument is still not built because the president of Warsaw is of the opposition party. People who come, for example, to the graves of this President Kaczynski that died in the plane crash are usually ridiculed that they are just crazy devout Catholics. And it's a very, very complicated, very ugly story. People are starting to think that perhaps we'll never know the answer of this. So, yeah. I hope I didn't make it more complicated.
Oh, no, absolutely. Thank you so much for this account. Very informative. Thank you. I hope this answers your question, Jon Stewart. Go ahead, Joe King, if you would like to say a final statement.
Just final statement would be whenever you read something about Poland, always remember that it's a very strange country in this respect, that I think Poles are one of the few people who have a group who are very, very important and occupy high seats in European Parliament, but would say very bad things for Poland just because they have connections with Germany, or personal connections with Germany or Russia. So be wary of what you read in press, because many of those people who write articles saying how bad it is in Poland, they are connected with the opposition party. So just perhaps some food for thought.
All right, thank you, Joe King. I hope this answers your question, Jon Stewart, regarding the whole incident and its historic account. Let's go to JJ.
Thanks, Em. I've heard you talk in past on psychological operations, and I'm seeing some images in Radio Free Liberty today, but obviously this has been going on for a while, of old-fashioned psychological operations with kind of a new twist. And there's posters on lampposts and bus stops and apartment buildings around southern Kherson with some pretty intimidating images and saying things like, do you want to live? Give yourself up. And they include a QR code to scan, redirecting people to the Ukrainian government, giving instructions on how to approach a Ukrainian soldier to surrender. What are your thoughts on these type of campaigns historically and on the combination of the new and old here?
Oh, wow. This is a very good question. So let's start by assuming that there must be a couple of FSB officers operating in Kherson. Then we know that there is partisan action happening. When we say partisan action, we mean Ukrainian resistance fighting the occupying force. The occupying force is the military force, collaborators, and the police force, which in this case would be the FSB officers trying to control occupied regions from a security perspective. Posters and leaflets have always been the oldest vehicle of delivery in PSYOPs. They were used politically, they were used during military conflicts, they were used during major wars, they're still used today, they were used in Afghanistan, they were used in World War II. Everyone uses them. Sometimes they're mocked, and sometimes they're effective. Now the combination of putting up posters or distributing leaflets and then adding a tiny QR code to it, or that goes very well with what the Ukrainians have displayed and demonstrated so far in this conflict, that they can bring in a whole lot of innovation into making everything old new again, and making everything new seem old, right? Because this is a combination between applying the PSYOP, but also providing a channel for whoever gets affected by the PSYOP to act or to communicate. Even by reading those steps, the PSYOP has achieved 90% of its objectives. So the combination is quite interesting. That's definitely the first time I heard someone combine PSYOP leaflets and posters with QR codes. And how they will affect Russian occupying forces in Kherson is yet to be seen. I don't know, but I'm assuming that if there are a couple of FSB officers trying to run the show, they must be really mad and trying to look for whoever is doing it. Maybe a couple of the phones used to check out the QR codes might have been successfully hacked by Ukrainian officers themselves, so it becomes a counterintelligence operation built on a PSYOP. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Probably it's one of those secrets and one of those stories that we will learn their full breadth in a couple of years or in the years to come. Thank you, JJ. Can you please send me the article you're looking at?
Absolutely.
All right, we have Debbie Vera requesting, and she loves to have fun. So Debbie, please go ahead.
Херсонской области удалось предотвратить прорыв сразу двух диверсионных групп. В ходе боя противник был вынужден отступить. Репортаж Михаила Андроника.
На границе Николаевской и Херсонской областей дежуривший в воздухе российский беспилотник заметил.
Debbie, you have the mic. Please go ahead. Unmute yourself and go ahead.
Артиллеристам и самоходные и орудиям СТС наносят точный удар. 4 месяца расчеты этих орудий круглосуточно.
Debbie, Vera, 3, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Понимают цели специальной военной операции на Украине и готовы идти до конца.
Не дай бог, чтобы наши дети боролись с этой чумой.
Mic check.
Мы не допустим того, чтобы мой ребенок, ваши дети, внуки бегали по этим окопам и боролись с этим. Победа все равно будет за нами. Рано или поздно это...
All right, seems that Debbie is not with us. So if you'd like to ask a question or bring up a topic for discussion, please feel free to send us a speaker request. We have a lot of empty slots. JJ, do you hear me?
I do.
All right, last time. Debbie, would you like to unmute yourself and go ahead, please?
Вражеские диверсанты используют и кустарные средства поражения. Остатки украинского ударного дрона, который был сбит над нашими позициями, собраны...
No, I put myself up because I thought you needed someone to do the mic check when nobody else responded.
Oh, thank you so much, Nick. Stick around so that I don't feel lonely, please.
Air siren alert update. Donetsk, full alert. This message has been generated with municipal data.
Bertrand Russell's pup, please go ahead.
Good evening. So just adding a small detail about the, phone usage and QR code and whatnot. We had a special Carson Cat on this space a while ago, and he was mentioning that, there is no OPSEC reason not to mention this because it's very obvious that one thing that Russian checkpoints typically do is checking the phones of the people and looking for reasons to
this message has been generated with municipal data.
And one thing that is typically done, again, it was mentioned before and it's everywhere, so there is no OPSEC reason not to mention this either, that people tend to have two phones, one clean phone for the checkpoint and the other one for, checking QR codes and using Telegram channels and whatnot in order to gather information. So that's just an extra bit from Special Carson Cat. Credit to him for the information.
Right. Thank you for that, Russell.
Air siren alert update. Donetsk, full alert.
Alright, seems like
this
a very
message
slow
has been
Thursday night
generated
here,
with
so
municipal data.
If you'd like to ask us a question or bring up a topic for discussion, feel free to send me a speaker request. Bertram,
Did we
please go
have
ahead.
any news? Did we have any further news about the airfield in Belarus, which this time yesterday evening was having flashes and bangs, and CJ, I think in particular, seemed fairly certain that it was likely to be a live fire exercise. And I said, well, would you normally do a live fire exercise dropping stuff on your own airfield at midnight? And it was generally agreed that that was quite a good point. But I wonder if there's been if anyone knows if there's been any, photo evidence today of craters at that airfield or anything. I haven't seen anything on Twitter.
Were you talking about the airfield in Crimea or the one in Belarus?
No, the airfield just inside Belarus.
Oh yeah, I haven't seen those yet because I've been out all day, and so negative. Or maybe if someone here who has looked at the craters.
Nick, I am just some random guy on Twitter, as you know, so I'm the least qualified person to give any type of military information. However, again, I can read Twitter, and I saw seemingly reputable OSINT accounts that were leaning towards the idea that it might actually be the Ukrainians that are probing Lukashenko to see what happens there. And the idea is that I can share some of those tweets. The idea is that in any case, Lukashenko is not going to be able to, have any reaction other than what is already doing, because he's obviously too weak at home and he cannot afford to go in further in his, licking the boots of the guy in the Kremlin. So that's all I can say based on sparse information, and I don't think that there was any substantial update to what we have seen yesterday in terms of visual.
Does anyone know anything about the losses? If they lost any airframes or the amount of damage the airport received that they can share with me?
All we have is grainy pictures from the distance, unless someone has seen something more recent. I guess satellite images, unless it's too cloudy, will tell us a little bit more tomorrow, I guess. I'm not sure what was the exact time of those mysterious explosions, but today there were still no satellite images, at least that I have not seen. That I have seen. So tomorrow we will probably see some.
And no official announcement from the Belarusian government?
Nothing.
Air siren alert update.
All right, thank you for
Mykolaiv. Full
There's an
alert.
amusing,
Cherkasy.
there's an amusing
Full alert.
video I just found while
Kirovohrad.
looking to see
Full
if there was
alert.
anything
Zaporizhzhia.
about
Full alert. This message has been
special
generated with
forces
municipal
from
data.
Sudan, Venezuela, and Iran arriving at a different Belarusian airfield for joint exercises. So the Belarus's only friends in the world have sent a few special forces troops there. They're climbing. They're shown coming off a plane and having a little bit of cake, and they're going to kind of run around the airfield or something. But yeah, Venezuela, Sudan, and Iran, everybody's favorite vacation destinations.
Oh, sounds very interesting. Nina, if you're listening, I can't find you because I think you changed your display name or your handle. So if you're still with us, please send me a speaker request.
I think it's
Siren
Marina
alert
now,
update.
if I'm not
Dnipropetrovsk.
mistaken. So if you
Full
look
alert.
for Marina,
This message
that
has
is
been generated with municipal data.
her current nick.
Yeah, she's not on this space. All right. We have Sanze Cooks requesting. So, fingers crossed. Masanze Cooks, please go ahead.
Air siren alert update. Dnipropetrovsk.
Hello, can you hear me?
This message has been generated
Loud
with
and clear,
municipal
ma'am.
data.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. There's nothing much from my side except to say I'm praying for everyone that is directly and indirectly affected. And I would like to urge people to pray. I'm not an advocate of Christianity or anything, but it's important this time to pray. And don't be alarmed, because it is mentioned in the Holy Book that these times will come. And these are the just
Siren
birth
alert
pains of what
update.
is
Dnipropetrovsk.
to happen in the
Full
future.
alert.
There's
This
more that
message
is
has been
going to
generated
happen
with
in the
municipal
world.
data.
People just need to stick to what they believe in and pray that their families are okay all over the world. That's all I needed to say.
Thank you, ma'am. Faith is indeed a powerful driver, and prayer is indeed a very useful tool during these times. Bertrand, please go ahead.
Respectfully, of course, everybody that finds peace in praying is a lucky person. I will just not resist, hopefully nobody is offended, to mention that Napoleon said that God tends to help the army with the best artillery. I will just leave it at that. Thank you.
All right. So, again, if you'd like to ask a question or bring up a topic for discussion, feel free to send us a speaker request. The Radar Report is a 24/7 space that more or less has been running since the invasion of Ukraine in different iterations to bring you up-to-date information about what's going on the ground, bringing you Ukrainian voices, experts, politicians, generals, even an astronaut at some point, not just an astronaut, the former commander of the International Space Station, to share insights with you and provide the most accurate and detailed and informed opinions and information on the war. Bertrand, please go ahead.
Just since it might be a little bit slow, I don't want this to become a dialogue between the couple of us. But one thing that was interesting to notice from my side after the Crimea strikes is how silent the media, Kremlin media channels were about that. There were like 3 statements that TASS published with something rather vague about,
all clear. This message has been generated with
there was some
data.
accident, it will be fixed soon. And I have to say that this is in strike difference with what happened after the sinking of the Moskva, where they were quite actively trying to shape the narrative. I don't know if it is due to the fact that they really don't know what to say this time around, if there is some other reason, if they are changing the strategy, but it was something that was a kind of interesting and quite obvious to me. There was also the Ukrainians were completely dominating for the last news cycle the media space and the social media space, and there was essentially no attempt to counter the narrative, the humorous and extremely effective narrative that the Ukrainians were capitalizing based on the attacks. So, any thoughts on that? I see plenty of hands now, so I will shut up.
All right, thank you for your comment, Bertrand. Let's go to display first.
Hi, just a quick comment on what Bertrand said. I saw some translated phone calls from Russian soldiers on the front lines, and they were hearing or speaking about how supposedly there were no air defenses stationed in that specific location, jokingly enough.
Air siren alert update. Share KZ. All clear.
So
this message has been generated with municipal data.
A company, an airline company from Hungary, of all places, surprised no, has now stated that they wish to begin operating flights to Moscow again from Dubai, specifically speaking. What can we do to stop this? I mean, Hungary is in the EU and NATO. It's pretty shameful, frankly speaking.
We will find that the legal entity operating, this is Wizz Air, which is based in Hungary, was for one time Eastern European only kind of low-cost airline. They fly a lot of planes around Romania, Hungary, Poland. They've recently expanded. They have a UK-based operation.
Update. All clear.
You will find that legally the airline that is operating them
this message has been generated
with
with
Air
municipal
Middle East
data.
or something. In the same way, for example, that since Brexit there have been 2 EasyJets. There's EasyJet UK and EasyJet Austria to get around various forms of registration. So in terms of it being an EU airline, it isn't probably very much legally. There'll be some holding company that may or may not even be based in Hungary. So this is an airline that started in Hungary. For example, British Airways is officially a Spanish airline.
Air siren
It's
alert
owned by a holding
update.
company.
Kirovorod, all clear.
So,
Dnipropetrovsk, all clear.
I
This
mean,
message
basically,
has
they're
been
going to be in the
generated
same
with
situation as
municipal
Turkish
data.
Airlines. Turkish Airlines operates freely in and out of the European Union, and it flies to Moscow. I'm not actually sure whether the EU airlines are they boycotting flights to Moscow, or is it European airspace that's closed to flights coming from Moscow, or I'm not certain what the actual the current blockage is.
European airspace is closed to planes taking off from Moscow and all Russian airliners.
Okay, I thought one possibility was that the EU had blocked Russian airlines and therefore Russia had blocked EU airlines reciprocating. But there's not much you can do. The one thing we could do, or one thing that public opinion could try and do, particularly for Poland, is to encourage a boycott of Wizz Air, and maybe they'll lose more money by people going to Ryanair instead in Poland versus what they're going to make on this UAE to Moscow run. I'm never sure that consumer boycotts work all that well, particularly in the low end space where people are very price sensitive, and they might say, well, yes, what's going on in Russia is terrible, but this is only very, very, very indirect. So possibly a boycott, but the fact they're doing this is annoying, but it's not going to kind of materially change the war. So we can direct some anger at them. We can print out some pictures of Wizz Air aircraft and throw darts at them. But I don't think there's a whole lot we can do. It will be legally extremely watertight. Don't worry about that. With the fact that it's coming out of Hungary, maybe I don't know whether the Wizz Air organisation is close to the government there. That may just be a coincidence.
Yeah, I'm not sure about any kind of holding companies. I just know that Wizz Air's headquarters is in Budapest.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the airline that is operating the flights is the company that owns the plane, which is not the same as the head office of the bigger organisation. And one of the limiting things about capitalism is you never really know where a company comes from. So, for example, in the last 5 years, the gross domestic product of Ireland has nearly doubled, and almost all of that growth is due to various multinationals booking all of their EU revenue through Dublin because they get a better tax deal. That doesn't mean that everyone in Ireland is suddenly twice as well off. So the legal entity that is operating these planes, to the extent that if the EU is indeed not allowing its airlines to fly to Russia, then this won't be an EU airline. The registration of the plane will not be, I don't know if it's HU or MA, but will not have it'll not have Hungarian tail letters. So all of that will be taken care of. Financial constructions will have been found to allow this to happen. They will know that it will have a cost in public relations terms. They will have possibly or not talked to the Hungarian government about it, who might have said, we don't mind, or yeah, you're doing me a favor, or Orban. We can certainly say to people, boycott Wizz Air. The alternative is to fly on Ryanair. People wanted to boycott Ryanair when Lukashenko sent up some jets and forced them to land and took the dissident journalist off about 18 months ago, I think that was. And there were people calling then for a boycott of Ryanair, despite the fact that to have not obeyed the orders of the jets might have been extraordinarily tragic. And then people criticised Ryanair because they didn't put out a political condemnation of the Belarusian regime within 6 hours, etc., etc. So we can get focused on little details. This isn't a big thing in the context of the war. if it annoys you sufficiently, then yeah, talk to some Polish people, tell them not to fly with Wizz Air. These days, people tend to fly, with whoever's got the best time, and so you're asking people probably to inconvenience themselves, and that's actually already quite difficult. That's quite difficult to get people to inconvenience themselves. It will only be the people who are really dedicated to the cause of Ukraine who will be swapping away from Wizz Air, and I don't know how many of those were planning to fly in the near future.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Display. Just a point of order here. We're discussing, more or less, everything related to Ukraine, and we go on tangents, but the space doesn't really stand behind organizing any political campaign whatsoever against a certain company or a certain entity, whether a campaign of boycott or a campaign of support or whatnot. People should be more informed about international players trying to make it or break it during the war. Yes, for sure, we can provide more information on that, but let's not just jump. What's the term? Jump the ship? No, not jump to the ship. Let's not jump to conclusions and start calls for boycotting X or Y or Z. With that said, a lot of hands up, so whoever would like to contribute in the speakers panel, please raise your hand when you want to speak. And Martin, please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, and Slava Ukraini, Heroim Slava. I got frozen out before. There was something wrong with my phone. I was in a mall, so I missed a large part of the conversation when you were talking to when the person from Poland was talking, and you were talking about
Air
the
siren alert update.
the air
Mike
crash,
Olive.
the plane that
Partial
crashed
alert.
with the
This
former
message has
Polish
been
leaders,
generated with municipal
a few
data.
years ago, and Katyn was mentioned. So I just thought, if it hadn't been mentioned, that anyone who's interested from a dramatic point of view should try and get hold of a copy. I think it might even be available on YouTube, of the powerful 2007 film by Andrzej Wajda, the great Polish director, called Katyn, with music by Krzysztof Penderecki, wonderful classical Polish composer. It really puts the Katyn massacre into a great dramatic relief. It's a moving film. I've seen it actually a couple times over the years. So I thought I would mention that, if that's all right, and I've just done that. And just finally, again, I don't know if this was raised before. I saw a news item. I haven't read the article. Apparently, North Korea,
Air siren
no
alert
surprise,
update. Michael
has
Live.
offered
Partial alert.
the war
This
criminal
message
in
has
the
been
Kremlin,
generated with municipal
whose name
data.
shall not pass my lips. I despise that person. Pardon me. 100,000 North Korean soldiers for the unprovoked, illegal, genocidal war in Ukraine. So just want to know if that had been mentioned, or if it's even worthy of any sort of discussion. I'll drop down to listener, and thank you. And again, Slava Ukraini.
Thank you for that. I see Ben requesting, so our favorite Frenchman. In the meantime, Hendrik, please go ahead.
Yes, now that we had the incident at the Naval Air Station in Crimea,
Air siren alert
and the
update.
distance,
Michael Live.
what is
All
the
clear.
policy,
Donetsk.
what is
All
the
clear.
probability that
Zaporizhia.
we might have
All
a similar
clear.
incident
This message has
at
been
the
generated with municipal
naval
data.
base in Sebastopol?
So your question is Ukrainian capability of targeting Sevastopol, correct?
Well, that was in the sort of quotes, because no one wants to quote take responsibility for this. But obviously, things must have changed with the blowing up at the air base or the naval station in Crimea. And I would also wonder whether or not the Russian fleet, the Baltic fleet, has repositioned its ship
Air siren alert
to
update.
Russia,
Michael
given
Live. All clear.
the hit at the naval
Donetsk.
station
All
in
clear.
Crimea.
Zaporizhzhia. All clear.
talking about the
This
Baltic
message has
fleet or
been
the Black
generated
Sea
with
fleet?
municipal data.
Oh, the Black Sea fleet that could go back. I think it's the Rostov-on-Don area.
Yes, affirmative. Well, my own money is on that action being Special Operation Forces action. I know a lot of people have been discussing all sorts of rocket, artillery, or missiles being used, but I think it was soft action. So whether Ukrainians can deploy soft action against Sevastopol, there's an array of solutions for that. One of them would include divers, and given the fact that the Ukrainians managed to free Snake Island, even though it's still far away from Sevastopol, for a small group of operators to approach the port and target some of its assets and then retreat safely. I mean, that would be a possibility. Whether they have the men, the training, and the equipment to do so, I don't know. Whether they can use the same plan they used to insert soft elements into that airport, carry out the attack, and exfil safely. Whether they can do that to Sevastopol, I don't know. If security had been lax around that airport, then security around Sevastopol must have been doubled at least, if the Russians realized that it was self-action. And if the Ukrainians are using a new weapon, as they said, that is 100% Ukrainian made, and they can now target Crimea, then when and how they will target Sevastopol and whether they will do it or not is probably a decision that they will make on their own, to a limit or to a schedule that suits how they want to develop a counteroffensive in the southern regions. If anyone else, if Ben would like to comment, or Nick, please feel free and go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Ben.
Fantastic. Okay, big caveat. I'm not a military expert, so you could be asking a donkey and you would have as much insight as me. But the maps I've seen implied that there were a lot of other very juicy targets across Crimea, being
Asi z 3 magazynów w Aleksandria I tam my тоже продаваем.
All right, Hendrik, does this answer your question? Would you like to have a follow-up?
Yes.